think about the statistic. 1 in 6 women has suffered sexual abuse in her life. 1 in 6. Now, as horrible as that, and you layer on in that, if that happens in the context of the institution of the church, which ought to be a place of perfection, a protection, it is a doubly compounded trauma. The trauma of the abuse, and then the trauma of the very place that ought to protect me from it is now enabling it, is now silencing it. That's just horrific. And I would just say, like, Christ weeps with you.
Hi, my name is Stacy McLaren.
And I'm John Beeson.
And this is God in the Gray, a place where we talk about spirituality, culture, religion, and all the gray places that we find God in. We consider this a conversation, and you are invited to the table. Thank you for joining us. So the one thing we hear a lot about these days, and it seems to have ramped up over the last, I would say, 10, 15 years even, is church abuse. It seems like every week a pastor is stepping down or being brought up, told to resign because of inappropriate behavior. Youth pastors, it's coming out that, way back when they started, they were abusing teens. Again, if you are on Twitter, because I refuse to call it X, it's almost on a daily, it seems like, but it just is one after another after another. Why would I want to come to church when abuse seems to be happening left and right? Like, how do you convince someone that no, it's okay, it's safe? Well, those churches were safe to somebody at one point too. So how do we, why would I want to come to church if there's abuse that's just running rampant, and it seems to be getting worse as the days go on?
Yeah, it's real, and you find it in every pocket.
Yeah.
So, the first major breaking pocket of this that I remember in my lifetime was the Roman Catholic Church's systemic abuse and covering up, not just abuse, but then covering up those abuses. And then fast forward, whatever it was, 10, 15 years after that, Southern Baptist Convention. And you can, if you're not Roman Catholic or Southern Baptist, it's not like our hands are free and clear. Like, it doesn't matter what pocket. There's abuse everywhere. And you look at it and you say, oh my goodness, what in the world? And so I think about on a personal level. I think of those that I've walked with who've come out of abusive situations with they've endured sexual abuse at the hands of pastors and leaders, of those who've been part of toxic cultures, controlling cultures, abusive cultures, all sorts of types of abuse. And oh my goodness, I just think, like, I'm right there with you. Like, I don't know how someone can step back into church with that kind of background. And I'm so sensitive to those who've experienced that. And I'm so empathetic for why they would just say, no way, I am not going there. Yeah. I know that it's part of your own story as well.
Yeah. Growing up, so when my parents entered into church, I was freshman in high school. And I remember, again, very, very fundamental, little tiny Baptist church. Didn't want to have much to do with the government because the government was evil. But therein lies a whole bunch of abuse right there, right? You're just, it's ripe for gaslighting and control issues. But there was a family there, and the father it came out that he was abusing his own daughters, but he was also abusing friends of the daughter. And as a congregation, we were told, we're not calling the police and we're not calling CPS because they are out to destroy Christian families, and you won't call. We'll handle it in-house. Nothing was ever done. Like, he was sent home from church for a couple of weeks here and there, but it continued. It continued for years and years and years. And like, I left that church on my own and still wondered when I got into another church and had a child. Like, there was still this, is he safe? Is he, there was a questioning of, is my child going to be safe here? Fortunately, we had a great preschool director. I could ask him any questions. But yeah, there was gaslighting. I learned later on, much later on, after one of the girls was already married, that he was actually brought up on charges. But still, again, spent no time in jail. Like, the consequences were really insignificant at that point. And yet those girls have to live with the trauma. And I know that there's healing, and yet there is still trauma. It's a both and, right? Like, I look at that and I think not only was there sexual abuse there, I look at some of our friends, like you said, that have walked through some toxic church situations. Not only is it the main events of abuse that happens, it's the manipulation in the conversation that twists it and makes you think that you're the one that has the problem. It's the looking at the churches who say to the women, just go back to your abusive husband and give him what he wants and be nice and do all the things. That's your responsibility. Like, that's abuse too. And so how do we speak into that? How do we draw families and husbands that have been abused and wives that have been abused in churches to realize that they still need community, but to do so with care and love and kindness?
Let me just begin with the Bible. Like, Christ is for the abused. And in fact, he's for protecting systems, for creating systems that protect against abuse. You think of Christ's words. He says, hey, woe to the one who leads a little one astray. It's better for you to have a millstone thrown around your neck, thrown into the depths of the ocean. Like, it is a serious, serious thing. You think about the statistic, 1 in 6 women has suffered sexual abuse in her life. 1 in 6. Now, as horrible as that, and you layer on in that, if that happens in the context of the institution of the church, which ought to be a place of perfection, a protection, it is a doubly compounded trauma. The trauma of the abuse, and then the trauma of the very place that ought to protect me from it is now enabling it, is now silencing it. That's just horrific. And I would just say, like, Christ weeps with you. Mm-hmm. He's outraged at the injustice. He's outraged at the leader. Like these are the leaders that Christ calls to account. I think of Paul's words. James as well, similarly, essentially says, hey, be careful. Don't be so quick to want to be a leader, because your standard is much, much higher. On the day of judgment, you're going to not just be asked to account for your own soul. You're going to be asked to account for the souls of those you've been given responsibility in this life. And so the very first thing I just want to say is that, like, I'm so deeply saddened by each one of these stories, and I can't imagine how deeply sad, angry God is, because God spoke to these things, and he calls churches to be the very places that work against this kind of abuse. Let me turn to this, Stacy. I would love to kind of hear your thoughts on this. Like, as you look to churches, what are the things that you should be looking for in a church? Because, like, you asked that question, like, how in the world can I even like risk going back to a church, risk being in community at a church? Like, what are the things that you can look for in a church to like know, like, I mean, there's no like seal of safety,
Yeah.
on the website. Like how can I know?
Well, I say first and foremost, I mean, if we're going to, let's start before we ever step on the property. I would look at a church's website, and if you can't find their statement of belief, that's a red flag. Like, they should have their statement of belief, their mission, their even like we have our Constitution up there as well. If you can't find that, and you maybe try an email to get a copy of it and you can't, that's a no go. On site, I would say if you can't get to the pastor on a Sunday morning, that's a problem, right? If you're at a church where there's security whisking the pastor off, or
Why do you say that's a problem? I agree with you, but yeah.
Because he's removed from the congregation that he's supposed to be shepherding. And a shepherd gets in the flock and becomes active with the burdens and the celebrations. And if they're being whisked away, they are no longer an active part of their own congregation. You should be able to come and pray with your pastor on a Sunday. I know that's a burden sometimes, but that the line is long, but you and our other pastor, Greg, stay until the last one has been prayed for. The other thing is that if your pastors have no one to be held accountable to, that's a huge red flag. An elder board should be not yes men, right? They should be ones that if I don't feel comfortable coming to you and saying something like, let's say, God forbid, something happened and I needed to say something but didn't feel right coming to you, I could go to them. And that should be well established, and they should be on that website too. You should be able to see the elders. Who are they? That would be just those practical things. Second thing is, or the other thing is that, can I make a connection with someone when I come on campus? And can I ask them, like if I see a leader, can I ask them questions about their church? What are their policies in childcare? When I go check in my child, can I say, hey, what is your policy if something goes awry? How do you check your children's workers? What's the protocol? We have background checks. We have training. If you're at a church where your children's workers aren't background checked, run fast, because that's a problem. Yeah.
None of these things can ever give us the assurance that nothing will happen, because, as Christians, we believe in original sin, which means that all of us are sinners. Mm-hmm. It's not like you're going to find that church where, here we are. Here's a group of non-sinners, right? Like, no, we're all sinners, and so we believe that. And your statements there are not statements that are like, hey, like, this will provide the assurance, and we recognize like there's that reality. But I think that open-handedness, that transparency, like we're getting kind of in the weeds now, and I recognize like we could go back and forth. There's some like personal beliefs I have. Like I'll go back to that elder, whether it's an elder board or deacon board. Different churches use different language there, but I would say, like, to me, this is a preference issue, but to me, I would be concerned if that's only staff.
Yeah.
I would be concerned if it's all non-members of the church, and the reason I say that is because if it's only staff, then you can have the dynamic of the senior pastor with kind of those who report to him as, again, that, it's just the nodding of heads. Yes, pastor, we're going to go that way. Is there true accountability? Can there truly be true accountability there? Can there really be true accountability if that elder team is non-local in the congregation, right? I would, I think it's actually appropriate and fine to ask the question, hey, how do the elders review the pastors, like, or review the senior pastor? Like, is there a review that happens, and what does that look like? And like all of that, you might feel like, I get that you could feel like you're being nosy or whatever, but I think just those types of conversations, a church shouldn't be worried about that and concerned about kind of, hey, yeah, I could, sure. Yep. We have lay elders here at New Life. And so Greg and I are the only staff members who are elders. And then we have a group of lay elders who evaluate us kind of formally twice a year. And they get staff feedback, they get congregational feedback in that. Greg and I meet with a counselor, an external counselor who provides feedback. And so all of those things are just, hey, like, yeah, that's the way we do things. And we actually continue to grow and change that and develop that. But the whole purpose of that is like, there's no one. Mm-hmm. This is not about a personality. This is about us shepherding the flock of God together, protecting the flock of God together. I would be concerned about a church whose policies, and there have been churches who have these policies, who take a principle that Jesus talks about. People oftentimes talk about as a Matthew 18 principle. It's just because it's found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18 is where Jesus talks about this. And Jesus says, hey, listen, here's how you're going to peacemake together. You're going to navigate a conversation, a conflict, by going in a conversation to the one who's offended you. And he talks about that. And then if you go to them and they haven't responded to you, then bring somebody else with them. Now, that absolutely is true, but there's ways in which churches can manipulate that. Because actually, if you take that same principle, you can actually look at that play out different in the life of the church. Say in the book of Acts, which talks about the early church, you can see that actually play out, for instance, in the Paul's letter to the church of Galatia, in terms of a conflict that Paul and Peter have. And I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, but all that's to say that actually healthy church conflict doesn't always look like that, because there's a power dynamic. Yeah. And so if there's an abuse situation, there ought to be a way in which we protect the voice of the one who's abused, that we actually privilege their voice, that we actually take them seriously. And sometimes the institution of the church inappropriately protects those with the most power in the church, the pastors, the leaders, those on staff. And we have to be very careful to say, no. For instance, here at New Life, if there's any allegation of assault or sexual issues, that's going to be taken to the police. Like, there are churches that have policies that prevent that. Yeah. Well, that's a red flag to me. Hold on. These are serious issues that need to be taken with the severity and the seriousness to which they're deserved.
Yeah. And it takes work to know that you're stepping into a church that feels like it's going to be a safe place. All the stuff that we both mentioned, it's time and it's work and it's effort. What would you say to someone who's like, okay, I'm ready to step back in. How do I discern what is the right place for me to be? All these other things, but is there a specific way that I can discern the right and good and safe place for me to be?
Can I say one other odd thing?
Yes.
Here's another strange thing, because here's what most people tend to be drawn to in churches. They're drawn to either the music or the preaching. It tends to be what they're drawn to. And I would just warn you, music and preaching are great. I want you to go to a church with solid music, solid preaching. But I've been around the block long enough to know that there's some really solid preachers whose inner life does not match the gifting that they have in preaching. And back to some of these things, here's another weird question. If I just took a secular job, I was no longer a pastor, here's the question I would actually ask the pastor. Hey, who are the people that you're walking deeply in friendship with? And I would want to hear them talk about friendships within the congregation, but I also would want to hear that they're friends with other pastors. And so one of the blessings actually here in Tucson is that there's covenant groups for those in ministry. And so I'm part of a covenant group of 5 pastors here locally, and we get in the weeds and get very honest and very vulnerable about kind of what we're going through. I think that's hugely important to know that your pastor is in a position and putting himself in a position to be vulnerable and honest. So that's just another question. So, but back to your real question. So how then do you step in? You've asked the questions, you've done your research, and now I just would say, lean in prayerfully, open-handedly. Don't shut down if warning flags pop up, then navigate them. But make sure you're not going to be able to enter into true community if you're guarded, if you're shut down, if you're just coming in on a Sunday morning and leaving out the back door. You have to actually be willing to step back in. And I wish, I'm sorry that's going to be hard. It's just going to be hard. I hope you have somebody to do it with. Ideally, you're walking into that church with a friend. You're walking into that church with someone you trust, with a relationship in place. But God has something for you on the other side. And there's no church that's perfect. But I promise you, there are churches that take seriously their care for you and their desire to protect you.
Such a good conversation, and I'm sure hopefully it will help someone out there, and I'm sure we'll have other conversations that will circle around this same topic in the future. We pray that if you are looking for a church, you find the one that is a safe place for you to grow and to lean in and to meet Jesus right where you're at. We will leave all of our resources and things that we think would be helpful in the show notes. We encourage you to hit that like and subscribe button so that you don't miss an episode, and we will see you next time.